Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel with me Bilkis, and here I'm gonna tell you about how English is being a global language. As you know, people often talk about English as a global language or lingua franca. With more than 350 million people around the world speaking English as the first language and more than 430 million speaking it as the second language. There are English speakers in the most countries around the world. Why is English so popular? And why has it become a global language? People often call English the international language of business, and it's increasingly true as international trade expands every year, bringing new countries into contact. Many of the best MBA programs are taught in English, so speaking it well can put you in a position to get the best training and credentials. Most multinational companies require a certain degree of English proficiency from potential employees. So, in the order to get a position with a top company, more the people are learning English. As an article posted by April Buchanan, there are 5 reasons why is English the global language of today. If you are learning English right now, change or it's probably something to do with getting your degree, advancing in your career, or maybe for personal reasons like having an English speaking partner. Nowadays, it seems like everyone is learning English and it is becoming the world's most widely spoken language. It's used in the business and a trade all over the world, and in places like Europe, it is spoken widely outside of business. But why? What makes English is the magic catch-all language that everyone wants to speak fluently. How did it become so important and widespread? The answer lies not just in the history of language but politics, culture, and technology. And here are 4 reasons why English has become today's global language. Number 1 is the British Empire. The first and the most obvious reason that English became widespread in the first place is because of the British Empire. Before colonizing around a quarter of the planet, Britons were the only ones speaking English, and the language was confined to the British Isles. But once they started doing trade with places like Asia and Africa, colonizing and settling around the globe, the language naturally spread. However, it was mainly used in administration and business dealings. Locals were still speaking their native language for the most part. But when it came to getting an education, that was done in English. So, English then became an elitist language of sorts, spoken by those who were educated in literature, philosophy, and poetry, much like French was back when it was the most widely spoken language. So, how did English take over French as the most spoken language? Well, there's more to the story than the Brits. And number 2 is post-war USA. The world after the first 2 world wars was a vulnerable and changing one. American businesses were booming and started doing trade all over the world, much like Great Britain had done in the previous century. This bolstered the use of English as a language in global trade, but at the same time, American culture was being exported heavily through music and film. The advent of jazz, rock and roll, and other popular music from both the USA and UK infiltrated the culture of people everywhere, making English more than just a language of business but a language of entertainment for the masses. Hollywood was also booming with popular film exported worldwide. And then in the 1960s and the counterculture movement arrived with social change and the hippie movement sweeping across the USA and Europe, which brings us to the next point. Number 3 is coolness factor. English is used across the world to signify certain lifestyle and culture linked to American style success or entertainment, or sometimes to signify certain business quality. Advertisers use it all over the world in multinational markets to sell their product in this way. But it is also the most common language used in the film and music industry. Big budget movies and everyone's favorite classic films are mostly produced in English. In music, if a band wants to become popular or famous, they will produce their work in English as well. Maybe it's because English will reach a wider audience, or maybe because English is taken more seriously as an element of good pop music. And then there are sports. American invented sports today like BMX and skateboarding and even basketball have an entire vocabulary in English, and many of the best athletes in those fields are English speaking even if they have been recruited from abroad. Fourth, technology. At the same time that the USA was becoming in the world business superpower, the internet was also invented the USA. This created an entire lexicon from the computer, and technology was invented in English. Computer keyboards are suited for writing language using the Latin alphabet, and the hardware for all our smart technology uses English words that have become commonly used around the world. As there was no other alternative in the place when the technology spread like fire to the corners of the earth. The world of science is also dominated by English for much the same reason. Historically, universities publishing important research were doing so in English, and as a scientist today, any serious publication must be done in English. With science and technology playing such a big role in our life today, English won't be going anywhere soon. And the last one is the snowball effect. Now that English is so widespread across the internet, on the radio, in school, and the business world, it's hard to escape. It is well known that in order to get a job in today's global market, speaking English is becoming a requirement more often than not. That's why the student and more adults than ever are taking private lessons, taking language immersion holidays, and studying English to become as fluent as they can. It is not a guarantee of success, but it certainly does help. Some people cite other reasons for the popularity of the English language, such as that is easy to learn, or that is evolves with our changing times. Some people long for the days when every country spoke their own language. But one thing is very certain: English will continue to grow as the world dominant language. You know, what does the global language do? When a new language is introduced to the new communities and a new better life is achieved by the language, it makes people prefer to use the language than their own language. In turn, the low frequency of using particular language may cause the language to vanish. This was true when English was introduced to academic life. The establishment of the Language Association marked more the eclipse of classics by English. The association was founded by the English to promote the idea that the new discipline of English had been their best means for real humanistic education. The effect of it was the vanishing of Latin and Greek from the curricula of school and universities. In the fact, there are at least three factors that cause the lost languages. The first is related to intergeneration language transfer. Parents who are unable or not willing to pass on a language to their children will cause their own language to die. The second is related to function of language. If the language is no longer to decay in the communication, it will not live anymore. People will forget it for sure. The third factor concerns the stability of the society. Community which is unstable is risky to a language to the keys. An example of this can be found in the former Yugoslavia. It used to have a common language that is Serbo-Croatian. However, after the genocide, Serbo-Croatian is not in use anymore. The Serb preferred to use Serbian. The Croats began to speak Croatian and the Bosnians started to communicate in Bosnian. Thus, instability caused the death of Serbo-Croatian language. Future trends of English. The notion of global English, just like the term globalization, implicates on the homogenizing process in which the dominant language, in this case English, overrides local language. Several terms are applied in the picture this kind of relationship between English and this local language. The terms above give an idea that the English-speaking countries are the subjects and the rest are merely the spectators if not the object. English is an important language, while other languages are only complement to English. Moreover, the use of third-pair terms without mentioning English or other names of languages strengthen the fact that domination of English over other languages has put people into seeing English as if it is the only language. Finally, the terms also show that English has been widely used that make it develops into various forms, some of which are judged as having higher status than the others. In the future, English as an international language will stand side by side with local language. It entails the use of English which is suited to the local taste and the use of local language for international communication in the region. For example, in addition of English, Chinese might be used in the Southeast Asian countries as the language used for international meetings or communication. This tendency arises from the awareness of people in the outer and expanding circle in that they should maintain their own language while making use English. Thus, to secure its role in the global context, English should compete or possibly lives in harmony with local languages maintained by their speakers.